Gunfights are a massive part of any first-person shooter, and obviously Call of Duty is no different. Gunfights are really like one of the #1 things you can do to improve upon if you want to like improve your like level of play consistently. So I'm going to go over some things that I think should help you win more gunfights in Call of Duty WWII. Some of these things are just going to be like general first-person shooter like basics, but a lot of it may be like WWII centered, so you could apply this to past and future games, but some of it is kind of WWII specific. And I'll get into the things that are WWII specific. I think it'll be pretty obvious. The #1 thing you can do to win more gunfights in any first-person shooter is give yourself an advantage in the fight. If every fight you get into is a 50-50 like gunfight, it's fair for both parties involved in it, you're going to lose just as many as you win very likely, or it's going to be close. You're not going to win like 15 gunfights in a row if you're doing that. You want to set up your gunfights so that you have an advantage in these fights. Giving yourself cover, giving yourself height advantage, giving yourself first shot by like flanking the enemy. All of these things make you advantaged in the gunfight, and it's going to make you like more likely to win the gunfight. And if you're doing all of these things consistently, you're going to win more gunfights consistently, and you're going to be getting those higher score streaks that everyone wants to get. Putting cover in between you and the enemy will give you a huge advantage in the fight because it gives the enemy a harder target to hit. If only your head or upper chest is showing in the fight, and the enemy's entire body is showing in the fight, you have a massive advantage in that fight, because he has a much harder target to hit, while you have a much easier and much larger target to hit. So if you have cover and you have good cover, you're going to be very advantaged in that fight. And I don't mean that you should just camp head glitches constantly, but you should know where the head glitches are, and if there's a fight, like move around the map in such a way that if you were to get into a fight, you have cover for that fight. You'll often see me, if you watch my live streams, I'm pretty much always just moving from position of advantage to position of advantage. I'm not really just camping in one, but as I'm moving, I'm putting myself in another position of advantage, and that's making it much easier for me to win these fights. If it happened, like, just use the cover that's around you, and if it happens to be like a good head glitch for you, then you should use it. Like, I don't see any shame in using head glitches. Everybody uses them, and like I said, I'm not saying that you should just camp them. There are some weirdos that just sit in the back of the map constantly. That's not really what I'm advocating at all. I'm just saying that you should be aware of the cover around you and learn the maps and learn where the good like cover is, and then use those cover as it's needed. You should learn to navigate these maps in such a way that you pretty much always have cover in between you and the enemy, and if you're in a spot where you know you don't have cover, then you quickly move through that spot, or you don't use it very often and use it like very conservatively. Flanking is another way that you can win gunfights consistently, and this is something that's somewhat hard to do right now because the game is new, and like I personally don't really understand it. Once I understand the game more, I'll be able to flank easier because I'll know like what areas are generally populated by the enemies. But flanking is another way to give yourself a massive advantage because you'll generally have first shot in those fights, and the enemies will have to turn around to fight you if you have like a good flank off. But flanking for me really just comes down to knowing the game better. So that's the first thing for this video. Set yourself up for gunfights that you are likely to win, and you notice I didn't talk about aim at all, and I didn't talk about like button layout. I didn't talk about weapons at all. I just talked about how you're approaching the maps. A lot of people, when they think of winning more gunfights, they think they need to be dropshotting more, which is effective, or jumpshotting more, which is effective. But the #1 single thing you can do to improve your like percentage victory in gunfights is to set up gunfights that aren't fair for yourself. And a lot of people don't address this, and I think it's because they really don't like understand the game at like a high level. They just think, oh, if I'm jumpshotting more, I'll be winning more gunfights, which might be true, but if you're setting yourself up to where you have a position of advantage in these gunfights, you're going to be winning massively more gunfights. So, #1 tip is set up your gunfights that you're like favorite in. This next tip is going to be about centering, which is basically when you just hip fire into aiming down sights. This is something that's always been popular in Call of Duty, especially with the SMGs. If you're playing a more like up close to medium range aggressive playstyle with the SMGs, if you put your hip fire on the reticle, if you put your hip fire reticle on the enemy and then transition into aiming while you are firing, you will likely hit some shots while hip firing, and you will be on target right away. Like I said, this is more of like a close to medium range tactic, but in most Call of Duties, your gunfights are going to be in close to medium range. It's not really a game where you get in really long range fights. I think your sensitivity should be low enough that you can track players with your hip fire reticle, and if you put the top like dash of the hip fire reticle like on your opponent's head, and then the rest of the reticle will likely be on their chest. This is something that you'll have to practice and adjust to doing, but once you have this down, you'll be very effective in like reactionary close to medium range fights like this. In these close range fights, you don't want to like start off aim down sights because the enemy can quickly strafe out of your view. But if you do it with your hip fire and then transition into aiming down sights, you're going to melt them very quickly, and you won't really have to like adjust your aim once it's on them. If you're like walking around to ADS in close range, for example, people are going to strafe out of your sights very quickly. But this tactic, I can make a like longer, more in-depth video on this if you would want. I think most people know what this is, and you'll see it in my gameplay a lot where I'm just like hip firing into aiming down sights. But if you want like a more like thought out video on just centering, just please like comment that down below and I could do it in the future. Attachments like quick draw and steady aim really help with that, and that's why I've been running them a bunch in World War II, and they've been helping me win a bunch of gunfights. Steady aim is going to make your hip fire more accurate, and quick draw is going to make you aim down sights faster, and both of those things pair well with this, and both of those things pair well with this like tactic, and this tactic pairs very well for winning close range fights. So keep in mind centering, try to like get good centering and good crosshair placement, and hopefully you can take advantage of this. It's basically how I've played with an SMG since Call of Duty 4. Jump shotting and drop shotting are moves that you can generally use in like a 50-50 gunfight to give yourself a slight advantage if you do get caught off on those 50-50s that I said you should be avoiding. And that's going to happen. Like I said, you want to set up your fights so you have an advantage, but there will be 50-50s. It's very hard to like make it to where you don't get any unless you're just camping in the back. So jumping and drop shotting is very helpful. In the jetpack games, you really didn't have to think about how you jump shotted as much because you could create your own momentum by holding the jump button down. But in this game, you need to have momentum built up in order to jump correctly. Generally, it's a sideways momentum that will make you the hardest target to hit and give you like the most like distance with your jump. I often use jump shotting in this game if I'm going around a corner and I know someone is there, or I'm going into a building and know someone's there. I'll jump sideways like past the corner or through the door, and it just makes you a very hard target to hit as you're coming like through the room and coming like face to face with the opponent. If you're just jumping when you have no momentum, like let's say you're just standing still and you get into a gunfight and you jump, you're really not going to be getting anything out of that jump, and that's where drop shotting comes in. Drop shotting is more for face-to-face gunfights where you don't have momentum typically built up, or like already built up, I'm sorry. And in these face-to-face situations, jumping wouldn't even do much because you would just jump at them, like if you were just to jump forward. But if you drop, it could throw the opponent's aim off, especially if you're shooting them at the same time, which will cause the opponent to flinch up as you're dropping. Both of these moves are very effective, and you will win a lot more gunfights if you practice them and learn like when you should be using them. I don't think there's a rule where you should just be always drop shotting or always jump shotting. I think you need to find what situations it works for you. And with jump shotting in this game, you really need to already have momentum built up. I pretty much only use jump shotting, like I said, if I'm going around a corner or going into a building. Or also if I'm like mid-sprinting and I get caught out, because if you're sprinting, you already have that momentum. But if you're like playing slower, if you're not like already sprinting, it's probably a situation that you want to drop shot in. These things are kind of subjective. Just try to find out what works for you. But really just keep in mind that you need to have momentum in this game to actually get something out of your drop shots. Or jump shots, rather. Sorry. A lot of people kind of have bad habits with jump shotting because they're used to being able to create their own momentum, and they don't really like understand the situations that they should be jumping in. And I've seen many people that just start spamming A once they're in a gunfight and they're not doing anything but throwing their own aim off. Sensitivity should be set low enough that you can easily track players, but high enough that you can still react to things that are going on around you. At the high end of sensitivity, 10 or 20, I don't know what it is in this game, whatever, the highest, you have maximum reactionary ability, and at the lowest end, at sensitivity 1, you have maximum control. So really finding a good sensitivity is a balancing act where you find a nice sweet spot for you, where you have a level of control that you're happy with, but also a level of like reactionary ability that you're happy with. I'm personally playing on 5 because I value control much more than reactionary ability, but you just need to find out what works for you and find out what works for your playstyle. Don't just copy someone's sensitivity or choose the highest option thinking it's good because you can turn fast. Find a sensitivity that gives you a nice level of control and a level of speed that you are comfortable with. So sensitivity is really like a topic that confuses me because so many people think they should just be copying someone's or playing as high as possible. If you're copying someone's sensitivity, like a sensitivity is all a feeling thing, so you're not going to have like instantly as good as aim as them if you're like copying their sensitivity. Someone has good aim with a sensitivity because they've practiced using it for a long time and they're comfortable with it. And then also turning fast, really, I don't value turning fast really at all because I really value understanding the game at a level to where I won't have to do that. Like I know where I understand like the spawns in the minimap well enough to where I likely won't have to like turn around quickly each time. I would much rather play intelligently and have a good sensitivity where I can control aim than putting like all my marbles into being able to turn on people. Like that's just not something I want to be doing, because that's like you're just setting yourself up for gunfights that you aren't favored in. You're like setting your whole sensitivity around the fact that you're not going to get in gunfights where you're favored in and the enemies are going to have an advantage on you, and I don't think that's a good idea. But like I said, it's just a preference thing. Find something that works for you and try to stick with it and practice with it and get like adjusted to it. I think you should be baiting your teammates. This is something that's going to seem strange because baiting generally has a negative connotation, But in reality, if they're there, you should use them. Like, if you see a teammate runs in front of you, why not let him go and be the first to die? Especially if he's going around a corner or going into like a courtyard or a building. Let him go in there and be the first to die if he wants to. And then you can get an easy trade kill because the opponent has revealed their position by killing your teammate. And maybe that, like, your teammate even got some shots on them that makes them weak. And then that's an even easier gunfight. I'm not saying that you should just hide behind teammates all the time. Like, it just goes into the head glitching thing. Use them when they're there, but it shouldn't be like your primary playstyle, you know? But if you notice a situation where someone could be taken advantage of, or you could bait someone, take advantage of it. Sure, like, I don't know why you wouldn't. There's no need to, like, race that guy and try to get there before him, and then you both are just likely going to die. So let that guy run in front of you, bait him, realize when you can bait teammates, and take advantage of it, and you're probably going to get a lot of easy trade kills that you might have died otherwise if you didn't slow down a bit. You should also position yourself around teammates so that you are isolated in some way. Like, if a large portion of your team is on your right, for example, then you don't really have to worry about enemies coming from your right side because that's where a lot of the enemies are. So you could focus more on the things in front of you and the other side's not covered by teammates. This really just comes down to reading the minimap and knowing what's covered on the map and like what routes the enemies are going to take. And some of like that comes into game knowledge that you may not have yet because the game hasn't been out very long. But just keep this in mind as you're learning the maps. Learn like what your teammates are covering by looking at the minimap. It might be kind of hard for now, like just seeing the minimap to know what they're covering because, like I said, you don't know the maps very well. But as you do learn the game, it'll be easier for you to know what your teammates are likely covering when you see them on the minimap, and then you won't have to worry about that slot as much. You can also do this just by playing the outside edges of the map. For example, if your left-hand side is out of bounds, you don't have to worry about enemies coming from there at all. So it's just a similar thing. You're just limiting what you have to care about by either using the edges of the map or your teammates. Both of these things will make it just easier for you to play because you have less things to worry about. And once you learn the maps very well, you'll know like when you can abuse certain things because of like how your teammates are playing. So bait your teammates and use the minimap to know what your teammates are covering. That way you don't have to focus attention on it. Gunslinger is a basic training in Call of Duty WWII that allows you to fire weapons while sprinting. This perk allows you to be more aggressive because you will not be punished by sprint out time as much. And this perk is very effective in like pretty much every Call of Duty, and it's been a staple perk in pretty much every Call of Duty that it's been in. Dexterity in Black Ops 2 and Ready Up Ghost had similar effects where you would be able to fire faster after sprinting. And they were both very powerful and both like required for aggressive play. So I think if you unlock the Gunslinger basic training, I believe you get it at level 24, you'll see my gun like doesn't go down when I sprint, and then I can fire right away after sprinting. And then I can combine that with the centering. So I'm coming out of sprint, I'm hip firing, and then I'm transitioning into ADS and I'm killing people very quickly. Whereas if I didn't have the Gunslinger perk, I would have to wait for the sprint out time to even start my firing my gun. So I definitely think you should be taking advantage of the Gunslinger basic training if you're going to be aggressive. If you're going to be more slower, then you should likely use one of the basic trainings that gives you the ability to have like reduced flinch. I think Primed does that, and I also believe there's another one that I don't remember the name of at the moment. So pick up the Gunslinger perk if you want to be aggressive. It's going to help you out a lot, and it's going to make your gunfights a lot easier. Yesterday I was streaming, and like I was struggling, and then I unlocked Gunslinger, and I started just dominating again. So like, really the Gunslinger perk is really like a retarded crutch perk, and it probably shouldn't be in the game, but it is, so you should be taking advantage of it if you want to be aggressive, like I said. The final thing for this video is just practice. All the things I talked about in this video will help you win more gunfights, but many of them are things that you need to practice to actually become good at. You're not just going to understand. You can't just start dropshotting and jumpshotting and understand which situations instantly work for you. It's kind of like a trial and error thing. Same with sensitivity, same with centering. It's kind of, it probably will feel odd at first, and then you'll get adjusted to it. And then same with even setting up your gunfights. You have to practice and learn the maps and learn like what positions work for you and like what routes work for you in order to actually get good at it. So just keep these things in mind and play the game, and like as you get experience with it, hopefully you'll be able to integrate some of these things into your game, and you'll be able to win more gunfights in Call of Duty WWII. That's going to do it for this video. Please give it a like rating if you found it helpful, and consider subscribing if you would like to see more content from me. Thank you all for watching.